Welcome to the Wildlife Wire. I'm Mark Searles,
And I'm Samantha Miller.
and this is your source for wildlife news and the people that make it. Today we have dueling domestication decisions, bringing bison back, Trump taps trouble, and fluffy, frolicking foxes.
Oh, I've got my crazy cats playing right now too. Yeah. They're so much fun. They're the best cats ever.
Hmm, Probably second and third best cats.
Okay, that's not very nice. And no one was saying anything bad about your cats. How are you today, Mark? Tell me about your day. How are you doing besides having the best cat in the world?
I do have the most amazing cat. She is more dog than cat, but she is quite wonderful. I am doing wonderful. I went out to my local coyote hideout this morning, and I had only seen the breeding pair and the subadult female this winter, but I saw the fourth one. So I've seen as many as five there, but I think number five has moved on to a different location. But it was great to see the all four together this morning. And it's the day before Valentine's Day, and in coyote breeding season, Valentine's Day is the big day we associate with it. And
Wow.
so
Did
so
they give
they're
little flowers to each other? Little
yeah,
boxes of mouse chocolates?
exactly. They do nice things.
That
So
sounds lovely.
it is lovely. It really is. They're loving animals that have monogamous relationships and just a delight to have around. So, are we good on coyote breeding behavior this morning?
I am good. I'm good on coyote breeding behavior. I just was in Rocky Mountain National Park. I had gotten a tip that there had been a large male mountain lion in an area and mountain lion tracks. I saw no lion, but I did go ski around for a bit and look for any signs. And it's been a good week so far. I think it's been okay for wildlife. And something exciting for us this week that we have coming up is we will be, as part of the Colorado Wildlife Alliance, at the Colorado Environmental Film Festival to talk to folks about wildlife.
Yeah, yeah. So that'll be happening on starting Friday, February 21st through Sunday, February 23rd. And it's held at the School of Mines in Golden, Colorado. And it's a really excellent film festival. I've attended it in the past. They used to have a photo competition, and I had photos in that, and just an all around really cool experience and really great films. I highly encourage anyone to come visit us and watch a couple of films. And yeah, we'll have Colorado Wildlife Alliance info. We'll have Project Coyote info. I'll have my book for sale, all the good things. It's your one stop shop for everything you need to get going in advocacy.
Yes, to get going to wildlife advocacy. And speaking of wildlife advocacy and the film festival, are there any films on your first news story on bison?
This is a test.
It's well, I can look it up and you can share your news story if you want with me because I want to hear what you have to say
Yeah,
about bison this week.
Yeah, I don't know, but I think there is. I'll have to look into it. But yes, my first news story is on bison, and it is titled Tribal Bison Ranchers Return Thousands of Animals to Native Lands and Witness an Ecosystem Rejuvenation. So
Ooh.
there is an organization called the Tonka Fund. They're out of South Dakota, and their mission is to return bison to native lands and work with native people to ranch them. So either they are putting bison in places where cows were, or putting bison into land that was essentially dead. And you know, there's obviously a very strong tie between native people, a lot of native groups, and bison and the plains, but also how much impact bison have on the ecosystems, and it's everything from black-footed ferrets, and they also depend on bison, to one of my favorite little birds called the long-billed curlew, and they use bison dung to disguise and hide their nest from predators. I didn't realize that deer and pronghorn and elk rely on bison to plow through deep snow to make their you know pathways, making it easier for them to walk around, and then also be able to get to grasses that were uncovered as the bison moved through. So many animals depend on bison. I've watched bison and coyotes uh, living together in harmony until bison says, "Get out of here, you little guy." And the coyotes like it because their bison are moving through and getting little critters disturbed, and the coyote will come in and snatch a quick meal. So the Tonka Fund uh, has placed or transferred 2,300 bison from the Nature Conservancy reserves to native ranchers. And this is a project that's near and dear to me as well, because I moved to Colorado for the mountains and fell in love with the prairies. And so a dream is to see more intact prairie ecosystems, and we've just devastated them, from the Dust Bowl down to just what we have today on habitat loss, and it's about 1% of native prairies are intact in North America, and they are one of the three largest grassland habitats in the world. So we need them. I want to see them back. I want to see the American Serengeti, as Dan Flores calls it, and so this is a positive step in the right direction.
Yeah, I also want to see that. And I was able, while you were sharing that story, to find that there is a film just actually on this very specific issue called Bring Them Home, all about the Blackfeet establishing bison
Wonderful.
herds on ancestral land. So there's a film for that, and we'll link to the story as well. And again, bison, they belong on the prairie, and I think prairies are such cool ecosystems that most people don't think about as you're driving through eastern Colorado or driving through Kansas. You're like, there's vast nothingness, but there's so much there. And yeah, it's
Yeah.
really cool to see.
Yeah, there is so much there, and there should be even more. Even grizzly bears used to be out on the plains, and elk used to be on the plains, and they were driven into the mountains and no longer habitate those areas. So, you know, it, a drive through eastern Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska should be one of the most exciting drives you could take.
Yeah.
And hopefully by the time our children are grown-ups or grandparents, maybe we'll see more of that.
Well, Mark, I am here to tell you that unfortunately, with the way things are trending, it is seeming like that dream is getting further and further away from us with my news story today.
Oh boy, let's hear it.
So, so I wake up each morning and I think, what horrors are in store for me today? What will happen to wildlife today, or what will happen under this administration to the environment? It's been um, incredibly terrible to watch everything kind of go up in flames. And what I am here to share today is one piece of bad news. I think we have mostly good news today. So, and I also have an upper for everyone after this, and that's that the Trump
Are you pushing
administration.
pills now?
I, I'm pushing foxes, which I will
Okay,
I will do
okay, that's
shortly, in short order.
surrogate upper.
I am here to share that the Trump administration is tapping the former Wyoming Game and Fish Chief Brian Nesvik to lead the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And you and I have talked about Wyoming a lot, only in the way that they don't manage wildlife very well, very much for wildlife. They have some of the most lenient predator killing policies, and I say predator with air quotes, They allow wolves to be killed by being run over by snowmobiles. They allow killing contests. They allow tons of trapping. And they have some of the most beautiful landscape in the country, really just stunning, stunning vast amounts of public lands too. And yet they allow all sorts of horrific things to happen to wildlife. Um, this appointment almost certainly seals the fate of grizzly bears. We can see the downlisting coming given this appointment. This guy has been very much against the Endangered Species Act, and in a time of an extinction crisis, his appointment can be catastrophic if he's not willing to look at the broader picture of ecosystems writ large rather than the special interests of hunters and trappers.
Yeah, yeah, it is super concerning, and I want to remind listeners that Wyoming is the place where they have predator management zones, and so they specifically have a ingrained distaste for carnivores on the landscape. I think about biodiversity and climate and the directions that they're going in, and then policy change. And so one thing that does give me hope is that the Trump administration wants to move away from renewables, but it's not going to happen no matter how many policies he puts in place. The fact is renewables are cheaper, and so industry is going to continue moving in that direction. So, it's more difficult with biodiversity, obviously, but um, we shouldn't let administrations dictate our own actions. And if we can keep momentum going, no matter what they say, then and when the next administration comes in, hopefully, they can bump us back in the right direction. 4 years is a long time, but it's also very short. So I'm I'm going to stay optimistic.
I appreciate your optimism, and hopefully, you can build us back up from the horror that I just introduced. Hopefully, you've got something more warm and fuzzy to make us all feel better. So go ahead, Mark, enlighten us.
Yes, warm and fuzzy indeed. So this is really exciting news from over 15,000 years ago. Uh, it's
Wow, breaking
made,
news.
well, it is,
Breaking news. Go ahead.
we got to make up for all the news that wasn't on social media
Okay.
15,000 years ago, okay?
All right.
So this is maybe dogs didn't need us at all to domesticate themselves. And so there's new research out there. So it's been well established that from today back 15,000 years, that humans have been domesticating dogs. And then beyond that, we weren't sure how exactly the domestication of wolves happened to create dog. And there's new research out there that says they could have possibly domesticated themselves. So, so the theory is that they proto domesticated, meaning they self domesticated or self selected. And the way that they're thinking this happened was tamer wolves were hanging around folks, and they mated with other tame wolves, and then that process continued on and on. Because if a tame wolf mated with a more weary or skeptical wild wolf, this whole process wouldn't have worked. So in the end, what they're saying is most likely there was some of this proto domestication going on, and then also humans shaped it. But we are still not sure what had a bigger influence. Did the human domestication side of things create dogs more, or did they have a bigger hand in this, or did the wolves kind of do it mostly on their own? And then we realized, hey, we can live with these animals. So really, really interesting. Whenever I see folks that have dogs or hear about folks that have dogs and then disdain for wolves and coyotes, it never I never understand it. I'm like, don't you realize that dog here, that little Charlie is coming from that wolf over
Well, they
there?
probably
So
say Charlie
like
was the wolf
cut
that
him
made
some
the good
slack.
choices. So apparently they might not be all the way wrong. There's a difference there.
So so do you think that wolf trappers are people that
Oh
really
gosh, I
align
bet
with
they're out
making
there
good
thinking,
choices?
wow, conservation, amazing. No, absolutely not. I don't think that at all. I think they make terrible choices all the time. And like our friend Carter said, it's a bunch of losers and riffraff out there trapping wolves and causing chaos. And I wish nothing but the worst for them. So here we are.
I
Yeah,
believe it
sorry.
was
Yeah,
jokers
sorry.
and
I would like to add my adjectives in as well. Uh, but no, I do not think that. I also have similar thoughts, especially around folks that will hound wolves and say, "Oh, we love our dogs so much," and yet they're engaging in pretty much dog fighting at this point when they were willing to hound wolves in the Great Lakes region for those terrible couple days. So no, I don't understand it. It's something I hope that we can. I don't know if we can rationalize crazy, Mark. I'm sorry. I'm trying, but I can't.
no, I think that is the definition of
Thank you.
crazy is it
Thank you for
can't be
that. Do you want me to
rationalized.
tell you something rational, though? I have a fun PSA
Please,
to close us out with today. No, this is
this is
this
your
is
brain
both
on
it's an
drugs.
upper and it's a PSA. And the the PSA is that it in addition to it being coyote mating season, it is also fox mating season. And what does the fox say during mating season? Some really funny things. So, female foxes will make crazy sounds to lure in the male fox dogs. Vixens will bring in the dog foxes, which is, as BBC explained it, the males are dogs, the females are vixens. I don't know if that is scientifically correct, but BBC told me that's how it works. But they will sound almost human-like when they're calling in those male foxes. And yeah, and it's
Like a
really
woman
disturbing
screaming,
to the
right?
person who hasn't heard the fox make that call before. I think mountain lions do something similar too, where it's that woman screaming sound when they're in mating season. So if you hear what sounds like a woman screaming, probably still call 911, but also be cognizant that it is fox mating season and it could be a lovely red fox vixen getting ready to have some kits and do their fox job. And just as a reward for sticking with us, the link to this news story will show you 17 seconds of a fox blissfully sitting in the snow, which really soothed me today.
Yeah. No, I love foxes and snow. I I want to see for my own knowledge. I would love to see what a fox, if you wet a fox in the winter, like how much of that is fur.
Oh,
Like I used to have a really
okay.
big fluffy dog and I was like, oh my goodness, she's enormous. And then she would get in the water and then I was like, wow, she's all skin and bones. And so, foxes are the floofiest of our little friends out there, and so it would be really curious to see how much of that floofiness
You want to give a fox a
is
bubble bath
is
and,
just
and
fur,
see,
and
see what
is
happens?
I well, get that vixen in the bubble bath, bring my
No,
dog
no, Mark,
in,
you
and
cannot bait the fox. And I would be curious too. I think we've got close enough. I have a dog that very much looks like a fox, and when you bathe him, he goes down to nothing. So I think your guess is probably correct.
just a hollow, like floating little nucleus in there,
Well,
and
I
that's it.
think that is a perfect way to close out our news story today. Everyone think about what Mark says, and we'll be back with our guest. This is our interview with Mandy Culbertson. She's the communications director for Wildlife for All. And one of the common threads that we've been discussing on this podcast is language. We've gotten feedback on different language, on how we discuss and label animals, how we discuss and label wildlife and actions around wildlife. And Wildlife for All does a really excellent job at breaking down really how language interfaces with agencies and how we as advocates and how agencies can transform how they discuss wildlife. And that has a lasting change, or the opportunity for lasting change on systems that manage wild animals. So welcome, Mandy. We're so glad to have you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited for this discussion today because, language is one of the most powerful tools we have. It shapes how we think, what we value, and ultimately what policies we put in place.
Yeah, absolutely it does. And I think that when the layperson or when the public hears how we discuss wildlife, you start to internalize that, right? Like, and one of the big words that agencies always use that I'd love to get us kicked off with is harvest. Harvest, harvest, harvest. So we'll see, we're going to increase the wolf harvest because we want to increase deer, which we know doesn't work. But the word harvest really sanitizes what we're doing. So why are we doing this? Where is this coming from?
Yeah, well, I think in wildlife management, it's really important to note that the words we use, they're not just neutral descriptors, right? They reflect often outdated, very harmful ways of thinking about nature. So when we call wolves predators or say they depredate livestock, right, we're subtly reinforcing the idea that they're threats rather than key ecosystem players. And, these terms aren't just technical, right? They actively influence public attitudes and policy decisions. So when we talk about things like terms like the word harvest, these words the agencies use really intentionally frame wildlife as commodities, as enemies, as problems to be controlled, rather than integral parts of ecosystems. And you know, when you say a word like harvest, I don't know about you all, but I kind of have a positive association with that word overall. Like, I'm gonna go pick an apple off a tree.
Right.
It's fall harvest. Isn't this a lovely bounty from nature?
Yes.
Um, that kind of framing isn't accidental, right? They've been using wording like that for decades to really sanitize the killing that goes on. And at the same time, if you contrast it with the way we describe really natural behaviors, like how wolves control prey populations, they make predation sound sinister. So human controlled killing is fine. It's harvesting. It's beautiful. It's a renewable resource. We can get into that. What wolves naturally do, well, that's just not okay.
Right. I think they even use the word depredation, right? They don't
Mhm.
even label it predation. They say when wolves depredate, which is crazy. So they assign that behavior to wolves and then harvest to humans. Go ahead, Mark. I saw
Yeah.
your eyes light up. I don't know if it was from depredation or harvest, but
No,
go ahead.
I was just thinking about if you have crops or an apple tree and you harvest that food, how is that the same as harvesting animal? Because if I went to my neighbor's house and picked their apples without them knowing or their permission, I'm not harvesting those apples. I am stealing them, right? And so, what kind of inputs has a hunter done in the past to grow their crop of elk or wolves or whatever it may be to then harvest them? I feel like you have to have steps in the beginning process to be able to then harvest something.
You should be rolling up your sleeves and building wolf dens before the harvest, is what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah. And so and then also when you look at crops, you have two types of crops, and you have your annuals and perennials. And so I had been chewing on this morning, and I think the only argument there would be, well, wildlife is an annual, and when the the animal has offspring, then, which is another word, then that is the seed for the next crop, right? And that's, to me, that's a big stretch. And again, you're doing nothing on the input side to be able to then harvest that animal.
Right. And I don't think anyone's out canning their wolves that they harvest either. I
There
think
are
that
canned hunts though, so
yeah,
that's a whole other thing.
well, yeah, and and just so folks who are listening knows, we laugh because this is absurd. It's really something that it makes no sense, and it's something that we really wanted to talk about because sometimes we will interchange agency language with actual language. And so instead of harvest, we always try to say killing or killed with snares or killed with a snowmobile in wolf's cases, which is how Wyoming allows wolf harvest, and that's with air quotes. Um, but sometimes, if we're communicating with agencies or we're discussing agency actions, we may use agency language. And it's kind of that funky line that advocates have to walk where you're trying to both change the system from within and also change it from outside. Mandy, are there other words we should be paying attention to in addition to harvest that are things that we can substitute as we use our own language around wildlife?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think we've already covered one, right? Depredation. I think you hit on a really important point, right? Like sometimes we have to use the terminology to get inside the door and to be heard and taken seriously with agency staff. But I think it's really important that the way I've always thought about this is you play ball with the first reference, and then your subsequent references you should reframe and use words that institute more ethical or compassionate lenses so that you're not just consistently reinforcing the harmful kind of dominant way of thinking. So, when you think about a word like depredation, right? That really, to me, it sounds like a crime, like a violent crime. Like we're framing wildlife as criminals committing this act of destruction. And it implies, too, that there's some sort of like intentional harm happening, right? That these wolves, these bears, these lions are intentionally harming humans. And so all of that, therefore, justifies like the disproportionate response, right? That happens, which is really a punitive response. It's retaliation. We're going to go out and kill this animal that's harming these livestock, right? And I'm not to say that that never should be the case. I understand sometimes, we can get into a lot of nuance there, but I do think that there's a permissiveness that's created by the use of the word depredation that just means, well, one cow got attacked, now we need to wipe out this pack. You see that happen over and over again with the anti-wolf crowd. And so when we want to talk about better alternatives, right, we should just say the word predation, period, right? Predation is a natural behavior that we can talk about. And then I think also we should just call it what it is, right? It's livestock wildlife conflict. And then we can get into the discussion of, well, why are livestock on this landscape anyway? Why are they unattended on public lands? How could this conflict have happened in the first place? And what should we push for with coexistence?
That's incredible. And that always brings me up to so many different pieces of language that are in play with wolf predations, right? And we can use wolves as an example, but the same would apply to coyotes or mountain lions or other animals that are carnivores. Um, that wolves depredate when the way things are explained, wolves depredate on ranchers' livestock.
Mm.
And what really is happening is wolves are preying on cows or sheep that are left unattended by a business in the woods. And instead of saying rancher, I certainly try to say livestock producer or
Mhm.
livestock business or livestock industry. And it's hard because I know that ranching is a lifestyle for some people too. And if I'm thinking about it in a lifestyle sense, I'll say ranching. But when we're thinking about a business, a loss of a livestock, of a cow or a sheep on public lands, you're losing an asset that's part of your business, right? That animal, you've made it your business asset. Your whole profit depends on this animal, and yet you've left it unattended. Like, could you imagine if Mark in Denver had an electronics store and was like, I'm just going to leave the door open at night and just leave all the lights on, leave the door wide open, put a sign up that says no cameras here, and then expect Denver to pay him? should he lose a phone that he was selling.
Please don't tell anyone where my electronic store is.
Sorry, that's my rant about wolves. But yes, it's just, I think that folks don't get to the point of knowing how absurd it is because of the language we're using, too.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Mark, did you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I would love to move on to another word if we have consensus.
Yes, I'm ready. Go ahead, Mark.
So this one is rather poignant because I was at the Colorado fur auction yesterday. But the word fur bearer, and what's so interesting to me is that word is, it's like they are, in that word they are providing something for us. They're not an animal. They are the animal who has fur for us. And it does get difficult because we don't have a better word to cover all of those species. And so the best way is to identify them by species name. But again, when you're, like Mandy was saying, when you're talking with agency folks, you have to start out using that word, and then we can move on. But it's just yet another way to devalue the lives of these animals to a specific thing that they can provide us.
Absolutely. I'm sensing a common thread I want to lift up, right? So fur bearer defines an animal by its economic worth to humans, right? Within our, let's just be real, constructed system of value, which is money, not its ecological role, which is its true value to the community it lives within, to itself, the rest of its species, to this planet, right? And so I think better terms, just quickly, are like, again, naming by species. I totally agree, Mark. And then also just like, keystone species, wildlife, just generally. If we're talking about something like beavers, let's name their value, right? Because I know beavers right now are the highest value for item that trappers go after. But there also are ecosystem engineers serving immense value to not only protecting floodplains, recharging groundwater, controlling, flood loss and riparian areas, but also immense value to other species. But going back to the common thread I was lifting up, all of this language that is so pervasive through agency work is all about centering humans. And I think that's the script I want to flip, right? Because if we start unpacking that, unraveling that thread at the core, it brings you to a whole new lens that, like, once you've seen it, you can't unsee, right? Once you start really examining, like, all of this is centered around defining these animals and their relationship to their worth to us, especially as it relates to money. And then when you start upending that, you can just really completely step outside of those dominant narratives. And I say dominant narratives, let me define that for the audience, just because I know that's not something everybody is familiar with, right? But basically, a dominant narrative is a default story that culture accepts as truth, right? And so these sort of common understood things shape what people believe is possible or what is common sense. And they're invisible. We grow up hearing them. They structure laws, economy, policy without us even realizing it. And they're reinforced by media, industry, and institutions, often without scrutiny. We see that play out in the media, especially in Colorado. But I think a good example of this is think about, one we've all heard in U.S. society, right? That anyone in this country can just pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Please note that was air quotes, right? Said another way, hard work translates to success regardless of your situation. Now, we all know that's not true. It plays out in demonstrable ways every single day. But that myth has undermined so much of domestic policy around poverty and healthcare and education for decades. And when you bring that lens into wildlife, right? You think about settler colonialism, manifest destiny, these base core stories that have defined how we treat wildlife through policy since the origins of this country, right? From wiping out the indigenous folk all the way up to what I currently hear trappers say when they describe wildlife as a renewable resource. I actually heard a trapper, I came across a video just yesterday where he was talking about the importance of effective communication. And he was saying, I have to say, I love coyotes and I love them for all these reasons, but I love them because they're a renewable resource. And he started talking about how they're a highly populated species and you can kill a lot of them and the public doesn't know these things. And so as a trapper, it's his job to educate, right? So if we start really unraveling those really harmful myths, I think we can start addressing some of the harm this language really causes. And I want to go back to specific words, but thank you. I wanted to just really quickly say that like all of this has this shared thread of these really harmful, superly widely shared narratives, super widely shared. Superly is
Yeah,
not a
I'm
word.
rolling with it.
Superly. We'll go with Superly. And
I love it.
could you give us an example? Mark and I both worked on Prop 127, and we saw a lot of pervasive narratives throughout that campaign. Do you have any examples that we could give our listeners on what this narrative looks like when it plays out? And Prop 127 was the initiative in Colorado to ban mountain lion trophy hunting and bobcat fur trapping.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Mandy, if you've got anything, we'd love to hear an example in real life.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. Thank you for raising it. So, really I saw a couple of things happen with Prop 127. One, I saw a lot of narratives around how mountain lions are both dangerous and overpopulated, right? So this really seeds back to ideas of man's dominion over nature, that we have this right to control nature. And so they can't exist in these spaces with us without us feeling incredible amounts of danger. So, the opponents of Prop 127 really pushed the idea that these are predators running rampant, right? And without this sport hunting, this trophy hunting, they would become an uncontrollable threat to humans, to pets, to livestock. But the truth is, science shows us that mountain lion populations are self-regulating. It is dictated by available habitat and territories and by the prey populations. They are not going to exceed the capacity of the habitat. And this, unfortunately, the fear-based messaging that was really stoked by the opposition resonated with a lot of voters who were unfamiliar with actual mountain lion behavior, really bringing up anxiety and kind of resistance to protecting them. And the other one I'll say really quickly is we see this a lot in Wildlife for All's work across the board. There's this thread that hunters are the real conservationists, right? That only hunters fund conservation, and that basically, nobody who doesn't share that lens, anyone who doesn't share that lens should not have a say. Respect the science, right? There was a whole thread on that.
Yeah, the respect the science is something I definitely want to dig into more because it's wielded as a weapon by more radical hunting groups where they'll say, "Well, respect the science, follow the science." But the truth is, and we talked about this with Gary Skiba, who spent his career as a wildlife biologist within Colorado Parks and Wildlife or Colorado Division of Wildlife when it was that science doesn't dictate policy. Science informs policy, but policy is managed by values.
hmm
And I think the other piece, too, just to close the circle on what we said about all the language centering on humans, it's also centered on a very specific set of values that a certain subset of humans hold. So I think, again, there's so many layers to this, but I would love to hear more thoughts from you on that, Mandy.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was going to say next is, values play this key role in wildlife decision making, but it's not really recognized. Um, Science can, as probably Gary noted too, can tell you how many mountain lions could be killed by hunters before a population will decline, but science can't tell you whether those lions should be hunted. That is a values-based decision. And so science is and always will be at the service of the worldviews that motivate it. And so when you talked about the values that are shared by this small subset of people, we actually have a great webpage on Wildlife for All's website about all of this. But essentially, there was a 2018 report that identified 4 types of value orientations towards wildlife. And the one that is shared by most people who use wildlife consumptively, so hunters, trappers, and anglers, as well as most of the agency staff, is one that's called utilitarian or traditionalist, right? And it's a view that's characterized by a human mastery over wildlife, so that dominion narrative again, and a prioritization of human well-being over wildlife. So these people specifically believe that wildlife should be managed for human benefit. Whereas most of the people who are advocates for wildlife and the vast majority of the public are actually a view that's called mutualists, right? Where mutualists believe that humans and wildlife are meant to coexist or live in harmony. And so wildlife actually deserve rights and consideration that they're not currently receiving.
Yep.
Right. We're wild. Oh, go ahead, Mark. Sorry, I'm totally dominating. I
Yeah.
heard male dominion culture and I jumped in and I've been dominating the
No,
conversation. So go ahead.
no. Well, there's so many words that just keep popping up as we're talking. And one thing that you had said was that with Dominion, it's the right to kill or manage or whatever wildlife. But I think it even goes beyond that when you're talking about that viewpoint. It's not a right, it is an obligation that you are the one that is here. Like if you do not participate in managing these animals, it will all go awry. There will only be wolves and mountain lions and bears left. And without the good deeds done by man, our ecosystems will fail. But talking on Prop 127, I have a sentence that has two words in it that are both hot
Good.
buttons.
You just said one that triggered me, but I can go back to it. So go
Okay,
ahead.
please, yeah. So predators need to be managed.
Oh, there you go. That was the word. Continue.
Okay, so
Mhm.
predator, better use is carnivore or wild carnivore. A predator has many negative connotations throughout society, both with people and with wildlife. And then managed, when animals are managed, we manage them by killing. And so it when you just erase off that thin veil of scientific sounding language, then we get to the values where I want to kill, and that's my right because I have dominion over these animals, and I will view them less because they are predators. They are not carnivore. No one says, "Hey, you know what? Starting in January, I'm going to, I'm going to change my diet, and I'm going to go on the predator diet."
Right, right, right. Or the ecosystem engineer diet for beavers. Um, no, I completely agree, and I think manage is a big thing that folks listening should pay attention to, because state agencies across the country will use manage, and it's really just interchangeable with kill.
Mm,
And I think that's the unfortunate thing, is that folks don't know that right now state agencies manage for the recreational killing of wildlife that's often unnecessary, rather than managing for healthy ecosystems or healthy wildlife populations. That's not the consideration. That's not the top priority of state agencies. It's how many can we allow folks whose values align with us to kill?
absolutely. What you both have said is so spot on. To build on that really quickly, going back to the harvest and crop analogy, the way that state agencies, mostly because of their funding structure, because they're incentivized, right, to sell licenses, to your point, Sam, and building on your earlier point, Mark, they view wildlife as a resource to be farmed almost. So they are looking at these populations the way that you would consider a herd of cattle, right? Where it's just you're bringing this group to a certain age to a harvestable limit, and then you let the, people with licenses go do the thing that they want to go do. Um what that totally ignores, that population level look, is it really ignores the intrinsic value of individual animals, right? It not only also does it ignore the fact that that's not really how wildlife populations should work. I think you could potentially maybe make some good parallels between like a deer herd management situation and cattle, but the rest of it to manage the rest of these species, and I hate the word manage, but just um to play into their, existing framing, to even manage other types of animals, carnivores, etc., in this fashion is absurd. And also, to ignore the role of individual animals within this is absolutely unconscionable, right? To say that, um, for instance, we just lost 907F, right, in Yellowstone, this wonderful, amazing wolf who was 11 years old, had lost an eye, had like been the dominant female in her, pack, the lead female, but then also like had played a different role at times. To say that she is the exact same as an animal who maybe is only a wolf who's only a year old and doesn't have that lived experience, couldn't guide its pack through danger, it is just silly, right? And that's how agencies treat these animals, as though one is the same as the next. And it doesn't really matter how many are, I hate this word, harvested by these hunters, or which ones, right? It's just about the quotas.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of another analogy where if we were to look at wildlife in ranching terms, I think it would be fair, and correct me if I'm wrong, that state agencies run cow-calf operations and the hunting community are the finishers, right? So they're going in to actually kill the animal that the cow-calf operation raised.
It's
I think
great.
that's an interesting analogy, Mark. I I would say, beyond that, really what state agencies are doing is because a chunk of their income relies on licenses and fees. That's really their product they're selling are the
Mhm.
licenses and fees, and that's their customer they're serving. But the other piece, I think, economically, is then we've got tons of species that are unhunted that don't get as much attention either. So there's certainly species of concern that don't get a lot of attention because they're not being hunted. And then another piece on the economics, too, for folks to know, because money does drive a lot of this narrative, is that often hunting groups will fund scientific studies done by state agencies. So we've seen that happen where Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation will fund a study on if we kill more mountain lions in this area, will we have more elk? It's been disproven a million times. We won't have more elk. Elk are suffering from habitat loss and climate change, but they'll fund that study over and over again because, again, predator, and then they'll see the prey species as valuable. And I think that's another important element there is that there's so many ways that money comes into play here and exchanges hands that it's really important for folks to think about. And again, this isn't to, I want to make sure that folks know this isn't to dismiss the ranchers, or this isn't to dismiss ethical hunters, but this is to start peeling back the layers of how things are managed now in a way that benefits the few while disregarding the majority of folks.
I agree completely. And I would add too, it's not to disparage there are there are quite a few state agency staff who are doing great work, especially
Right.
as you pointed out. You think about, it's about 10% of the species in this country are hunted, actively hunted with, or managed for licenses. Again, you missed my air quotes. Sorry, y'all. Um, that means 90% get almost no attention, no funding. And so there are people within state agencies doing very good work on state wildlife action plans, species of greatest conservation need. Sorry to throw out all the jargon, but that's really the funding mechanism for species that are in need of study or are declining and in need of our support. And they are a minuscule they receive a minuscule amount of funding compared to the species like elk or bighorn sheep or other game species, which is maybe
Right.
leading us into the next
So
word.
yeah, we could go there next. And I also just want to echo what you said about state agencies. I've had some fabulous interactions with some very talented state agency employees, and I would love it if we could elevate their work more. I think that as advocates, often we just see the issues that we're targeting, and we're like, oh, we've got to go after this specific issue. We don't like that you're hunting mountain lions with packs of dogs. That doesn't seem like fair chase. We're going to target this so the agency becomes the other. And I don't want to paint them with broad strokes either. So that was a great call out, Mandy. But yes, let's talk. Are you talking about big game, or what are we talking about today?
I mean, I think just the word game in
Yeah.
general, right? Because again, we're defining them by their role and their value to us, which is a sport value or a trophy value. Because as much as these folks want to scream up one side and down the other that it's not trophy hunting, I could play a video for hours of all the images that get posted to social media daily of them posing with the dead carcass of the animal they killed. So y'all, let's be real. It
Yep.
is trophy. It is
Oh,
about the trophy.
yeah, and it goes hand in hand, right? Game, trophy.
Mhm. Play
It's
a game, win a trophy. Love it,
Yeah.
Mark. I just have
yeah,
to be
Uh-huh.
really explicit.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
Great.
also want to take a step in the agency direction, and I want to read a sentence that, on the face value, sounds really great, but then when you think about it for a second, not so good. So, as far as Colorado goes, Colorado's wildlife is for all Coloradans because the state's natural resources are managed for the benefit of everyone. That sounds nice. Like when you throw benefit in there, it sounds great. But first of all, animals are not natural resources, they are individuals, and they are not here solely to provide us some sort of resource. Second, managed. We went over that. Third is benefit for everyone. Again, animals are not here for our benefit. They live next to us, they live with us, but if you go up to a squirrel or a mountain lion, and if you were magically able to communicate with them and say, hey, did you know that you're here for my benefit? They'd be like, you're crazy.
Yeah,
I
intrinsic
love it.
value. Intrinsic value is not a part of current language around species in different states, right? That's the animal's value to itself. It's a value just being alive that we don't ever think about really in state agency management frameworks.
Mhm. They don't even have a lens for it in a lot of fashion. I'm not trying to excuse it, but I also just want to say because of the way that our society is so run by, again, money driving everything, how could you? How could they, you know,
Right.
unless they really acknowledge the harms of capitalism? But we don't have to go there today.
Well, we'll save capitalism for a later date, Mandy.
Fair
But
enough.
no, I'm wondering, as we go towards the end of this interview, what can our listeners take away from your website? What are some useful tools that they can use to engage in this wildlife management process and start reframing these narratives?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if we want real change, we have to start undermining those dominant narratives that we've kind of been talking about today, right? So it means challenging these old ideas and replacing them with ones that reflect what we actually know, right? That wolves or other carnivores aren't villains, that nature doesn't need human control, and that coexistence is possible. And, we can't separate policy from narrative. So if we want those better protections, we have to stop reinforcing the language. So I think good takeaways are that language, reflects power, right? So if we, as I said earlier, if we need to play into the system, use the word that the agency wants us to use once, but then use your power to reframe that and to provide a better alternative, you know, in your second reference. Maybe you're speaking in front of a commission, right? Or you're writing in a comment, right? So say the thing that you need to say, harvest quota or whatever, right? And then subsequently call it what it is. Call it killing, call it trapping, call it shooting. Um, I would say, also just follow and support organizations who are working on coexistence, who are working on narrative change, who are working on trying to upend the system. There's tons out there, whether you're, working across Colorado, you're working on the national lens. And one thing that anyone can do, we didn't really get here today, but there's so many examples of how these narratives play out in the media, right? And I'm not just talking about news media. Just think about how many times I don't know if this drives everyone as to the point of infuriation that it does to me, but every time you see a wolf depicted in a movie as the, big bad scary thing, right? My husband, honestly, like at this point, he's like, I don't need to hear it. I saw it, because I'll get going, right? But call it out wherever you see it, right? I also will just say in my personal life, I have a 1-year-old. I just got one of those toys that has the string that you pull and it says the animal sounds and it's a farm related one. And literally, it's all farm animals on this circular little board, except there's one coyote. And I kid you not, y'all, the diagrams, the like drawings of these animals are all like happy, friendly, or whatever, until you get to the coyote, which has beady eyes and pointed teeth and is instantly depicted as the bad thing on the board. And I was just like, this indoctrination is starting with my tiny child.
Yeah.
Of how we portray these animals and what value they hold for us. So anytime you see that sort of thing, I'm truly thinking about writing to the toy manufacturer. That's where I'm at right now.
You should. You should. I think that you absolutely should. And your husband should proofread your letter for you. And he should read it too. But yes, no, I absolutely agree. And same thing with our kids. I know Mark's got a kid the same age as my kid. And just reinforcing that with wolves, we talk about wolf families.
Mhm.
There's some really great books out there too about individual animals that help, I think, connect the dots between the emotional lives of animals and children. Mark Beckoff is actively writing one right now that I look forward to reading. But also, there's a book called Springer, just about an orca who was saved and was really starving in the Puget Sound, or We're Wolves, which is all about the family interactions of wolves and how they treat each other. And I think there's a lot of opportunities there. And yes, I share your pain when I watched Frozen and the wolves came out as bad guys. I'm like, wait, no, I loved this movie. Why are you doing this to me?
Right.
So no, I totally get it.
If I can add one more plug, I would also say, not everyone's advocacy permits this because it's a big lift, but if you can, get involved with your state wildlife commission, right? I know Colorado has a great base of people who are supporting, change at that level. Those meetings are not always easy to attend. Not every state allows virtual participation, but Colorado does. You all have a really great you have meetings held all over the state. You have really great virtual participation options. Those folks need to hear every single meeting, not necessarily like that they're doing something wrong, but they need to hear your values, right? They need to hear, you know, um, to fund the swap, right? To fund the state wildlife action plan and those species who are in conservation need fully, or that you'd like to consider a name change to not have to always refer to animals as fur bearers, right? You don't want to call it the fur bearer report. You can
Right.
start seeding these little kind of rebellious moments throughout, and it doesn't have to be always against a new big initiative or a big bill of harm. I think that's the one thing I'd love to encourage people to do is like if we all just think about what's one thing I could do today, try it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And for a plug for us, so Sam and I have started the Colorado Wildlife Alliance, and we provide that guidance to help people participate in meetings with Colorado Parks and Wildlife commissioners, and then we also provide the ability for people to travel by giving them a scholarship if the location is far away. So you can find out more about that at cowildlifealliance.com or
.org.
.org.
.org. Yeah,
.org.
gosh, Mark,
Um,
you're already.
I
And then
know.
Wildlife for All too. We'll certainly I'll link Wildlife for All's website too. It's wildlifeforall.us.
Mhm.
Um, and I'll make sure we link that. And there's so many resources there. But yes, go ahead, Mark. Plug us more. I do like
Yes.
hearing good
Yeah.
things about us.
Well,
Keep going.
I also wanted to talk about so Mandy was saying, say the agency word and then change it to the word that fits what it actually is or your value system. I know that there is a lot of fear around that because we are afraid to be labeled as animal rights extremist or this or that if we say killing instead of managed, and there there's a perception out there that's that using the proper language or our language is going to not have us on equal footing with the hunting community. And to me, I think the best way to overcome that is just saying it and encouraging others to say it. And then once we have many people changing their language, then that fear, whether it's warranted or not, of being labeled one thing or another, will go away.
Well, I agree. And thank you so much, Mark. And thank you, Mandy. It's been great having you on. We'll have to have you come back because there's so many layers to this language. And we hope to talk to Michelle too, who's the executive director of Wildlife for All, so we can dive into state agency reform. And we are just so appreciative of your wisdom and your work, Mandy. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you all. I appreciate the chance to nerd out on narrative things because that is where I live all day, every day. And
well, if you're looking for nerds, Wildlife Wire is the place to be.
Excellent. I found my home. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you. This has been an episode of the Wildlife Wire with me, Mark Searles, and my co-host, Samantha Miller. Thank you for listening.